Good. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Carrie Dunn Herrera. I'm the Assistant Director of Health Promotion here at Healthy Capital District. We are so grateful for all of you to attend today. We're appreciative of your time, and we're very excited to be able to offer this wonderful series on the impactful, life-saving, evidence-based role that the certified peer plays in and around our community. Today's presentation will hone in on the specifics of hiring, onboarding, and integrating the peer, and we'll build off of the great presentation that Ruth Riddick gave at the kickoff event for this series. If you are unable to attend that event, please check out our YouTube channel because the recording is on there. In the interest of time, as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, please put your name, your contact information, and your agency in the chat box. Also include whether you are receiving or interested in receiving continuing education credits. In order to receive those credits, you will need to remain on for the duration of the presentation. And then there will be a QR code that you can scan with your phone, but we will also have the link in the chat so you can answer a survey. The survey is very brief. I did it, took me maybe 2 minutes at the most, but it's very helpful for us, both for funding, but also to make sure that you're getting what you're expecting out of these presentations and in planning future presentations. We have just a few quick housekeeping items, which is that materials, resources, as I mentioned, the recording of this will all be mailed down and sent out to you next Thursday. We hope that you came today with questions. We hope that more questions come about as the presentation goes on. We ask that you put those questions in the chat, and then at the end, we will get to as many as we can, but any that we can't get to will be answered in the follow-up email. I think that's everything for the housekeeping. So now I just want to give a huge thank you to our wonderful partners and collaborators that we could not have this event without. So that's SAMHSA/ORN, ASAP of New York, and our wonderful partnership with For New York. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our partner, a wonderful colleague and human, and a fierce and loving advocate, Teresa Knorr from For New York.
Thank you, Carrie. And it's so awesome, as I said, to see so many people that I know. I would also do some housekeeping and request that you mute if you are not speaking so we can cut down on dogs barking and children screaming or whatever other background noise. So thank you for that. I will apologize to the folks that already know Friends of Recovery New York because I'm just going to do a quick little dog and pony show just for the folks that don't know who we are, because our whole objective at Friends of Recovery New York is to be that connecting tissue of the recovery community. And so I see that we have partners on this call that I don't know. There's lots of folks that are new in the room who may not be familiar with us. So just briefly, we are an advocacy and education and training organization, a statewide RCO, a recovery community organization. We are that connecting tissue with all of our local partners, local smaller RCOs all around the state of New York. And then we also partner with national organizations like Faces and Voices of Recovery, just to advocate for the needs of the recovery community, make sure that we educate and bring people together. So with that, I want to turn it over to our sponsors, and I will let Emerly Santiago introduce herself. And thank you so much for sponsoring this beautiful event again. Emerly, it's nice to see you.
Great, it's lovely to be back. Hi everyone, my name is Emerly Santiago. I'm the Assistant Project Director for the Opioid Response Network, New York and New Jersey region. So just to give a little bit of background in terms of the Opioid Response Network, we're a federally funded organization that provides technical assistance in the areas of prevention, treatment, and recovery. And what we mean by technical assistance is that we work with subject matter experts to bring education, training, resources, consultation to organizations that focus on helping communities overcome substance use disorders. And that's one of the reasons why we're here. We've had the pleasure of collaborating with Carrie and Teresa, and we are able to bring the wonderful Cheryl from C4 Boston. I know you guys are all going to be in great hands with her. We've had the pleasure of working with her before, and she's been amazing. So if you have any questions about the resources that we're able to provide for the Opioid Response Network, I've left my information in the chat, and I can put it in again, since I'm sure it's probably buried in there somewhere. I unfortunately have to hop off, but also my colleague, Katie Cunningham, will be here throughout the session. So if you have any questions for her, please feel free to reach out or message her directly if you have any specific questions. And now I will let Cheryl introduce herself.
I was muted. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Cheryl Gagne. I'm a senior associate at C4 Innovations. I'm also a person in recovery and have been working with the concept, the idea of recovery since the early 90s when I was at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation at Boston University. At the same time, we started working with people with lived experience and integrating lived experience into our services. So that was a few decades ago now, and we've learned a lot over the years. Back then, they often called them consumer providers, if anyone's old enough to remember that awkward term. But soon, very soon, the term peer support provider came into our lingo, and really the practice of peer support became much more organized and explained. Great training programs grew out of the 90s, and many of them exist today. So today I'll present on how to recruit, hire, onboard, and integrate peer support workers. I do want to reiterate to please put any questions, comments, complaints in the chat box. So as we go through, I can keep one eye on that as I'm keeping another eye on the presentation. So please feel free to do that. I know you're muted, most of you, but if you want to raise your hand and make a comment, you may do that as well. Okay, so I'm happy to have you all here on a Thursday afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. There's a lot of information on these slides. So I just want to tell you that, we will be going through a lot, some things more surface level, other things we'll get into more deeply. I do have resources at the end of the presentation that I hope you will access to kind of really flesh out more of your understanding of recruiting, hiring, and integrating peer workers. I'm not going to say anything about ORN, although I have a couple slides. Emily did a great job. But just to remind you, what you as an individual, you as a community member can request assistance from ORN. They do provide training, technical assistance, and everybody is welcome to put in a request. This is kind of what we'll do today. This is our agenda. We're going to start with a very brief overview of peer support services. I'm pretty confident that Ruth did a lot of this last week, so we'll be kind of quick and dirty on this. We'll get into strategies for recruiting potential peer support workers, talk about some approaches to interviewing and hiring. What are some best practices around interviewing? We'll talk about onboarding. How do you really begin to welcome? And these facts might be true not just for peer support workers, but for all new hires. How do we onboard them in a way that helps them feel integrated, help them feel as if they belong with the organization? We know that good onboarding can improve employee retention. Then we're going to talk about assessing readiness, kind of how your organizational readiness for employing peers. Back in the day, back in the 90s, I think organizations would pop in their head, we got to hire a peer, they'd hire a peer, and nothing was ready for the peer. They had policies and procedures that got in the way. So we're going to talk about the organization and readiness. All right, so I just want to, just one word about, I use the term peer workers, a person who offers peer support and is paid. So that's who we're talking about. I know there's a lot of peer support that happens outside of, behavioral health organizations, sort of organic peer support, but I'll use the term peer support worker to describe somebody who is within a place of employment. I hope that language works. So let's just talk, peer support. I always go back to the roots and Sherry mean about peer support being a system of giving and receiving help founded on principles of respect, shared responsibility, and mutual agreement of what's healthy. It's not based on clinical models or diagnostic criteria, right? It's about understanding another person's situation empathetically through the shared experience of emotional or psychological pain. And when we talk about recovery, we kind of see it as a universal term to describe the human experience of sort of growing beyond a difficulty, a catastrophe in our lives. Peer workers are people who have been successful in their own recovery and can help others in similar experiences. Other definitions of peer workers came from a recent article that sort of reviewed within the substance use treatment settings, the research that's been done on peer-based recovery support. And they define it as a process of, giving and receiving non-professional clinical help for people to achieve long-term recovery. So peer workers, this is really core, that peer workers really address those social determinants of health or social determinants of wellness by providing information and resources related to health, navigating complex systems of care, addressing issues of housing, education, employment, advocate for accessible services in the community, support people to engage in the community, focus on social connection, address issues of discrimination. And peer support has been identified as a protective factor in the development and worsening of chronic health conditions. So we've seen a lot of peer support move into the realm of health and wellness, as well as recovery, seeing that it's kind of all related. And these social determinants of health are very powerful in terms of influencing health outcomes, including outcomes for substance use disorder. We do know, just based on the research, that peer support has a much more powerful effect when we talk about their assistance with people who are very disadvantaged, who are currently very disadvantaged, maybe experiencing homelessness, living in poverty, unemployed, having struggles with maintaining life in the community. Sort of the values or principles of peer support, just kind of honed down to the basic bare bones, would be that peer support is all about self-determination, helping a person become an active participant in decision makings in their lives, helping people set goals and achieve goals. There's a real compassionate connection, and that's the heart and soul of peer support, is that relationship and that connection around empathy. Sharing lived experiences certainly is part of that, and empowerment and growth. And that's usually through, modeling, accompanying, helping people learn how to do things for themselves. Empowerment is really our capacity to kind of act on our own best interest. And those are kind of the basic principles of peer support. What we do as peer support workers and what we don't do. You've seen these comparison charts before, so I don't want to focus on it too much. But the first bullet of listening and reflecting, curiosity and compassion, really trying to explore with the person what their life situation is. You've seen these compare and contrast, and they're very useful in terms of training peer support specialists or peer support workers to work in the organized system of care, for them to understand, what do I do and what do I not do. This slide didn't match, but I love it so much. I had to keep it in. So, there may be some tasks that peer support workers are asked to do, and this comes up less than it did, say 10 years ago, but still comes up in a lot of organizations, a requirement to write clinical notes. So peer support workers may write encounter notes, but shouldn't be sort of dictated, guided to write a clinical note that is filled with, clinical information that is antithetical to peer support work. An encounter note would describe what the interaction was like. And many peers write it with the person they're meeting, or show the note to the person, so that, again, it isn't something that's done for a person, but rather something that's done with any coercive activities, and that includes observing urines, drug testing. Not a role for peer support workers. Providing services without the person's participation. Okay, so peer support workers put a lot of energy into engaging and activating people to participate in their own treatment, rehabilitation, recovery. Requirements to do work outside the role. Most peer support workers do an array of tasks that strictly speaking may not be peer support. It might include driving and accompanying, or maybe making sandwiches, but the majority of the tasks that are in the job description are peer support tasks, not housekeeping, not driving, etc. Doing for rather than doing with. That too is really core to peer support, is the mutuality. Lack of supervision and support around peer relationships and boundaries. And it's not because peers are really bad at relationships and boundaries. It's just that when we engage with people, it's often outside the structure of the organization, right? It's easier to keep a boundary sitting in an office, having a conversation, but out walking on the sidewalks, in the coffee shops, in and around the community, there may be many more challenges that come up with boundaries, and managing boundaries and relationships is really core to peer support services. And I'm wondering if there are other kind of activities that you've seen that kind of have some potential for being challenging. Any other tasks? You can go ahead and write into the chat box. Other tasks that you've been asked as a peer support worker, or you witness people being asked that really isn't peer support role. You can go ahead and put those into the chat. And Calliope had a question about how a peer would assist on issues of discrimination, and we will get to that, I promise you that. Peer support workers have a strict code of ethics. Now, there isn't one national one that covers everyone, but I know the state of New York has a code of ethics for peer support workers. But, despite there not being one national one, and there being like, maybe 50 or more different ones, there's a great deal of consensus across all of the code of ethics. And, similar to most other professions in this field, do not cause harm. That's the very first one, is no harm caused to the person. Do not exploit the person financially, emotionally, operate within your scope of practice. We see this a lot. Stay in your lane, you know, not to be giving advice about how to work at the steps or with medication, etc. Stay within your scope of practice. Fulfill your duty, meaning, you know, follow through and live up to the expectations of the role. There are ethical aspects of that. You know, managing relationships and boundaries. And I added, humorously, there seems to be a collection of codes that speak to keeping the organization out of the news. Don't do anything that will embarrass us. And so that may be more in a code of conduct for employees, but the, you know, overall ethical practice really kind of falls into these categories. And again, because peer support happens, you know, often outside kind of a strict structure within a program, there's a lot more effort and attention that needs to be paid to the relationship. Non-traditional helping relationships characterized by, you know, mutuality, shared experiences, emotional connections do lead to boundary challenges. The nature of peer support work will lead to the fact that, you know, boundaries need to be attended to. Dual relationship, and whether that's simultaneous or consecutive, are much more common for peer support workers than, say, for social workers or people who don't have lived experience, because, you know, of connections in the, I'm gonna meet somebody, because of connections in the recovery community. Huh. Mute. Okay. Sorry, I keep trying to mute somebody and I'm having difficulty. All right. Okay, so relationships are often discussed in supervision and you know, with training. And supervisors, again, often will talk through relationships almost in every supervisory session to see how things are going, with attention to the boundary. So that's my background on peer support work. I know that Ruth probably did a much more thorough job last week on this. We're going to move now to looking at, you know, hiring, recruitment. So in general, for recruitment, most organizations have their standard practice. And we encourage people to expand your typical job search, to really go beyond the usual, you know, of monster.com or whatever, you know, Idealist, wherever you post your jobs, typically to expand your service, to involve non-peer staff and organizational leaders throughout the hiring process. And I didn't shout out, you know, you'd certainly want to have another peer support worker or two on the committee to hire, and a service recipient or two on the committee to hire a new peer support role. So you want to have a team, but you want to make sure, you know, organizational leaders and non-peer staff are, you know, on board too. Again, right from the beginning, hoping not to silo these positions into sort of a special category that's off to the side. Right from the beginning, we're thinking about integration. And I know the people that I've been involved with hiring, I've had a stronger connection to, you know, throughout their tenure at places I've worked. And then the most important, you know, one of the most important things is to write a detailed and accurate job description. There are lots of great examples of job descriptions that have been written, but it really requires for the program to sit down and think through, really walk through the details of what you want for that role. And so writing detailed job descriptions before you even begin recruitment is important. So expanding your search, your typical search, and I stole this list right from the peer support toolkit. But they've also been places that have been fruitful in hiring peer support workers. So, you know, thinking about advocacy organizations or community organizations. A lot of colleges and universities have collegiate recovery programs and hiring from there. So these are kind of some opportunities to reach out, you know, to reach out and have connections. We shout out peer-run programs and RCOs. You know, it's a lot of movement within the field. So, you know, outreach events, one of the best persons I ever hired, I met at an HIV event and just chatting it up, and over time, you know, got to know her through that day and asked her to come apply. I think that's called poaching an employee, but it worked out for us. So these are some organizations, you know, some ideas to reach out and really, you know, help people hear about the job. All right. So a bunch of people did come up with tasks that, you know, are often too many case management duties. And although, you know, peer specialists will often link people to services and supports, they're not the case manager. The person needs a case manager. Assessments, you know, peer support workers do not do assessments. We're not assessors. That's not the nature of the relationship. And then, you know, providing transportation. That's not to say that people can never provide transportation. That may be part of the role, but as a, you know, discrete job to transport someone you're not supporting or accompanying is not a proper use of peer support workers. So getting people, you know, organizational leaders in the hiring process. So getting leaders involved. We want to have a real investment from the whole organization. Again, this isn't a small thing we're just trying to do once, but something we want to have as an offering in our service array. And so involving leaders increases their involvement and their investment, increases their understanding of peer role and what might be needed to succeed in the organization. Certainly fosters a more welcoming environment. And, you know, you do want to create a small recruiting and hiring committee. Again, that includes leadership. Certainly easier when the organization is small. Some, you know, orgs that are small enough, maybe you have lunch with the CEO on the first day, but that certainly doesn't happen in larger organizations. But how do we kind of recruit the right leaders to be involved? The job description, I'll get into more details about here. You want to be really clear about the centrality of lived experience in the description. You can actually put this into words in your public job announcements. In the job, you know, person must have experience as a current or former user of mental health services, right? The EEOC, the Equal Opportunity Commission, allows for you know, having criteria related to a disability if that disability or condition is a core aspect of the job. Now, you can't ask about it in an interview, but you can certainly put these in your job description. So the person must be willing to share their experience. The person, you know, must have personal experience of addiction and incarceration if you're hiring specifically a peer support specialist with that. You can describe qualifications too if you're really looking for someone with experience with MAT, medication assisted treatment, then you can put that in. Experience as a pregnant person with opioid use disorder, experience as a foster care, incarceration, you can go ahead and put that in. You know, preferences will be given to people who've had, you know, personal experiences in foster care. And then spend time detailing the tasks and responsibilities of the position. And again, this is what you'll want to do with your team, to really walk through what are the core tasks. It's different from program to program. The role might be peer support, but the applications may be different. So spending some time with that. Again, the toolkits that I have left for resources have some great examples within. So don't be afraid. You don't have to recreate things from scratch. You can really kind of stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us. So we have the, a faster recruit or a broader recruitment. We're going to cast our net wide and in our unusual places. Actually, I want to talk about the strengths of weak connections. If you're really hiring, a peer and wanting to, find some good candidates, ask everyone you know. Your hairdresser might know, someone at the bus stop might have an idea. So the strength of weak connections too, that list kind of brought us to places we'd be pretty sure, people with lived experience might be working or, participating in any way. But having, weak connections can also lead us to great candidates too. So we want to hire, assemble our hiring and interviewing team. We want to make sure we use a range of interview techniques, not just, rapid fire question answers, but you do want to have some pre-planned questions. Now this can take some work to really come up with a good interview process. Again, I have a great example in the references from Horizon House. They have given it much thought, and I don't anticipate most organizations would have anything as sophisticated as theirs, but there's some really good ideas to borrow from the Horizon House hiring process. Again, be sure to include service users as part of the interview, as part of the team, so that service users can get their own questions asked. One job I went for way back in 1984, so that I was a baby, but one job was I actually was interviewed by all the residents in the house. That was a surprise. I went to an interview expecting to meet with the house director, and instead had all the residents interview me. And it was it was very novel back in 1986, and worked out well for me. So you want to be sure to include service users. Make sure team members know relevant employment laws. Americans with Disabilities Act is relevant, not just for peer workers, but for any worker who may have a disability that they need attending to. And then make sure your team members know what questions you can and cannot ask during an interview. This is a little tricky, but you might be having people who aren't in the human resources department in the interview. So, having training people. So you can't ask questions like, when did you last use alcohol? Are you taking antipsychotic medication? A few more questions you can't ask in an interview. How old are you? What's your marital status? What's your sexual orientation? Do you have a history of drug or alcohol dependence? Are you a US citizen? Do you plan on getting pregnant in the next 3 years? Okay, but so most of us know this because we've worked in the field for a while. We understand these questions to be discriminatory, but not everybody knows that. So making sure that everyone on your interview team really you can go off script with not questions that aren't written down, but make sure they know the taboo questions. You don't want to have an interview sort of ruined by a question that's not legal to ask. But what you can ask, are open-ended questions that would really help you get a sense of what this person would bring to your team. You can ask, tell me about your personal and professional background as it relates to this position. not a direct question, are you in recovery from addiction, but tell me about, open-ended, letting people sort of choose where they wish to begin. You might have, give a difficult, situation scenario. So telling people, some staff may be apprehensive about or unsupportive of peer support position. How would you deal with this? What do you know about the concept of recovery? What's your personal knowledge and how did you come to this understanding? Have you experienced a conflict with a coworker in the past? How did you handle it? If not, how do you think you would handle it, right? So helping people kind of imagine scenarios, that would help. So, in the interview, pose scenarios to inquire how a person might respond to a situation. And you want to be looking for those desirable characteristics. What do you really want the person to be able to do? Be excellent at teamwork, maybe problem solving. Using supervision, awareness of their own strengths and limitations. Right? So you can create scenarios in hopes of asking people, of helping people get that. They have changed Livix. Now the personal use is no longer has to be personal. My thoughts on that. They always ask about criminal background. They do always ask about criminal background, Mona. They on the application, and they can do that on the application. Many organizations have so-called ban the box, but a lot of organizations still do, and that is legal. It is legal also to run a CORI, which is a criminal records investigation. So they can do, but in the interview, might not be the place to ask about criminal background. And I'm reading a question. Certified recovery peer advocates draw from personal experience, but the certified addiction recovery coach doesn't have to have personal experience. How do I really think if we're talking about peer relationships, that experience is important. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is Carrie. I just wanted to chime in that was actually in response to Mona Lisa, and I'm not sure if she's in New York or not.
Okay.
In New York, OASAS does require for the CERPA to have personal experience, but not the CARC. And there's also a question from Bill Gonzalez. If you want to unmute yourself.
Before you go on, Carrie, can my video's not working, and I do apologize.
That's okay.
A lot of technical difficulties, and it is funny because when I first started as a peer 5 years ago, you definitely had to have personal experience. Now they're more gearing it, even for the SERPAs here, or at least definitely at our agency, you no longer have to have personal experience, but you had to have, your life has to been impacted by addiction some way, somehow. So you may have helped a family member, a friend, a loved one. And so it's that thing in you that still wants to help others and provide peer support services. And so I've seen a lot of peers come on. They might not be personally in recovery, but they've helped someone in the past, and and so
Are you in New York?
Yes, I'm in New York.
Okay, because that is the things that you're describing in that relationship and having a family member, et cetera, are usually all of the things that we're looking for in a CARC, where the certified recovery peer advocate, if they're going to be certified in New York, they do need personal experience, and that lived experience is just invaluable to the role.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
And a lot of states have parent peer support, so peer support for parents who may not have that lived experience of, addiction or mental health disorder, but can support other parents who have gone through it. That's a different certification. But for this, we can imagine, using the centralness of the lived experience. So, and, also, in interviews using role plays, in addition to scenarios. You can conduct an interview in a group or individual, maybe a mix. Most organizations have perhaps a series of interviews. One might be a quick and dirty screening just to make sure they're eligible for the position. The next might be a lighter level interview with members of a team, and then, a final face-to-face interview. But having a mix of people and having a mix of opportunity. So I think that's a way to go about interviewing, taking your time of really spending time to describe the ideal characteristics, the desired characteristics, and structuring questions that would help you get at that. So then the hiring, we've interviewed people, we're hoping that people will step on board. We want to hire people by offering competitive pay and other benefits. I know the pay scale is low and reimbursement rates have a lot to do with it, but there may be other benefits that the organization can offer to compensate for a rather low pay. And that could be educational benefits, reimbursement for any transportation. And so other benefits can be added in. You want to provide adequate resources for the job. A lot of times people don't have access to the resources, and that may be, things that they need, such as a food pantry or clothing closet, or, knowledge of the, shelter system in the area. So having adequate resources for the job. And although, on average, peer support workers are very good at sort of scoping out the resources in a community, the more that they are provided by the organization, the peer support worker is freed up to do other jobs. And then, understand and manage reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. Connie talked about agencies that are seeking experience of people in the workforce, and that's often the case. That, however, because peer support is relatively new profession, there are fewer peer support workers with long tenure. The low pay also has people leaving the field after they've had some success. So many organizations will end up hiring people who are new to the behavioral health workforce, maybe new to the workforce altogether, if they're young adults or adults who because of their disorder have been out of the workforce for a long time. So we'll talk about that in onboarding. Pay should be comparable to other positions with similar qualifications within the agency. So if you've hired paraprofessionals to do tasks, that require a high school diploma or GED or, an additional certificate, people should be paid comparably to those. In many organizations, it may be they're comparable to case managers. Consider offering benefits to less than full-time workers. Are there partial benefits the organization can offer? We want to include continuing ed opportunities for staff. Again, because some people are in the early career coming out of training, there's a lot of interest in continuing training and continuing learning. And then using a more universal approach when it comes to raises and promotions, so that, people who are lower on the pay scale are considered for raises and promotions. And this is a task that human resources needs to continue to develop, to create equity within the workforce, so that people feel valued and attended to. You might need to alter some policies and procedures to facilitate access to needed resources, whether that's transportation, petty cash, food, space, etc. That many organizations have policies and procedures, but there may be many layers. And if there's a way to streamline that to help peer support specialists or peer support workers get their resources quickly without going through the multiple layers of requests to have that done. Really, again, any changes in the organization is an opportunity to look again at policies and procedures that could be streamlined, altered, tailored to make it more efficient. New employees should have a mentor in addition to a supervisor to help them navigate the organization. My mentor when I came into C4 was someone who worked in accounts payable, which was really good for me because I'm very bad at the organizational stuff. And she was able to help me navigate that within the organization. The mentor, helped, had lunch with me a few times, had worked at the organization, so she could give me the scoop on, different people and different processes within the organization. She could lay on some shortcuts on how to get through things. And supervisors should always check in with people to make sure that they can access the resources that they need. This is sometimes a complaint of peer support workers that it's been challenging for them to get what they need from the organization. So just about accommodations, right? So, the Americans with Disabilities Act has been around now for 32 years. Last month, I think it's 32 years. And it's really enabled people with disabilities, physical, sensory, emotional, any kind of disability to succeed in work. Most of the accommodations needed by people with substance use disorders or mental illnesses are very low cost, kind of light lift accommodations. And here are some examples. Having a flexible workspace and workplace. A lot of behavioral health organizations have created more flexibility for all of their staff. So some of these accommodations may just make sense to have as a policy for all staff and need not be a special accommodation for an individual person. But it might be, telecommuting, later start time, makeup hours, having breaks. The most common example given, somebody who goes to an AA meeting from 1 to 2, 3 afternoons a week and makes up that hour at the end of the day by working later. So that's a flexible workplace. Modifications to workspace. Some people have extreme sensitivities to sound or light. And so, using room dividers or eliminating fluorescent lights, increasing natural light, giving somebody a windowed office, relocating space to a quieter space. I don't want to be near the copy machine anymore or the bathroom. Because so these are accommodations people can request. I can't concentrate on my notes because the computer is, right near the printer and everybody walks into that office. Can we move it to, that would be an example of accommodation. Modify or remove unessential tasks, break large tasks into smaller pieces, maybe, additional training. And support. Some tasks are harder for some people to use. One thing that people have needed more training on in many organizations that I've encountered is documentation, and may need some, modifications to the work tasks that notes are written and then reviewed before entering initially so that the person has an opportunity to improve the note. Equipment and technology, lots of things can come up here as an accommodation, having a tape recorder to tape meetings or, a white noise machine to eliminate sound, smartphones, tablet, all of these kind of equipment. Flexible and supportive supervision, very important, written directions, written feedback, additional training. I supervised somebody that years ago at BU who was very, had a very, very severe anxiety disorder, and our communication was written, because when I gave her verbal directions, she had a really hard time, hearing and then understanding. And this solution of writing to each other, give directions and give feedback through writing helped a lot. She was stellar. But the disability being difficulty with kind of interpersonal relationships. Another organization I consulted with had a great outreach peer support worker. He was amazing, very, very enthusiastic, out there, kind, but he was terrible at writing encounter notes. He'd forget, he didn't have great written English. He'd had a disability through school. He did manage to get a GED, but his writing and was pretty bad, and it would take years for him to get his writing up to the standard. So the accommodation for this man was that he could audio tape his notes quickly. He actually did it in his phone, and then at the end of the day, come in and somebody wrote the notes for him. And he had to review before he signed them, but he didn't have to put it into writing into the computer. And that worked out as an accommodation for him. Rather than have him lose his job because of one task that he really, and it's a critical task. I understand documentation is important, but in order to keep him, we had to make an accommodation for the writing. Any questions about accommodations or, okay, so a couple people already use OneNote and dictate notes before submit, very easy to do on your phone. Yep. Yeah. This is Ernesto's story of having a peer in training, great street out work, but promotion led to an admin position, put in a windowless office with zero support, right? It is all about the supports. What do I need in terms of my, of my work? What are the people, places, things, activities that I need in order to succeed at my job?
Cheryl, someone had asked about your feelings on someone who's currently working, who's experienced a reoccurrence and is still active in their addiction.
Okay. So again, with active addiction or psychiatric symptoms, as a supervisor at the job, I would really focus on the performance. Is the person able to perform the job? Certainly they have to obey, all the rules and requirements, which means no substance use on the job, no substance use prior to working. I think there needs to be a series of conversations with that person, offering them ways to support, their resumption of recovery, but keeping it focused on the work performance. If there are problems with the person being late or the person not following through with things, that those are the issues. And, having candid conversations about, active substance use while working. Certainly offering people opportunities to take a leave of absence and go to treatment, or, take a leave of absence and do what they need to do to resume their recovery, hoping, the person can come back. Sorry. Other questions or comments on our experiences with people kind of having a relapse while on the job?
I have something to say.
Yeah.
Before I seen it was like more that you had to come in and tell that you had a relapse, but in the last several years, we believe in harm reduction, and we've been instilling that into the participants that we serve. So they haven't really like, said anything. Again, I think and I was just talking to someone in the chat too, it's your own personal experience and what you believe in. Now, I believe in total abstinence, but if I'm serving somebody and they believe in harm reduction, it ain't time for me to about sharing about total abstinence.
Right.
It's time to support harm reduction and see what can we do together to make this work for you, So again, I had to open up my eyes because we had went to a function with the agency and a couple of peers went up and got a drink. And so I'm like, no judgment, Mona. How can you judge what they do? They didn't do, they wanted to have a drink. I just knew I couldn't. And so the one guy, we were good friends, and he said, Mona, I don't drink at work, but you can't say me and you ain't did some hell of a peer work together. And I was like, you got that. And so ever since then, I've just changed my perspective on it. As long as you don't bring it to the job and that, and if you smoke weed and the person saying they're smoking weed, it ain't time to say, well, it's legal and I have a glass of wine every night that's not time to talk about that, so that's where I'm at on it. But I do have a question, not to get off topic though. How often do you think supervision is needed for peers?
At least once a week.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That's my at least once a week. And
Start.
we'll get on to supervision.
Okay.
And then, and PRN, when I talk to peers, and I've done a ton of interviews with peer workers in multiple, settings, there is the aspect of kind of needing, and this may be early career, may not be someone with, years of experience under their belt, but needing access to supervision, kind of PRN when needed, and many supervisors have talked about, the benefits of that, of having kind of an open door policy for peer support workers. And it's not like it's supervisors have told me it's not been abused or overused, that the peer support workers really can kind of make good decisions about when do I need some support or clarification around this.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment, but this might go towards supervision, and I think you just said you're going to do that later, so I could wait. It's a comment on what I just heard from the woman that said something before.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So if I understand correctly, and I could be wrong, the way I heard it was, well, let me put it this way. There are standards. We have an code of ethics.
Yes.
And I think one of the reasons for that is because we can't have people doing things based on their own set of principles,
right,
own set of morals, because then we have 10 different people doing 10 different things based on what they think is right.
Correct.
That's a problem. I think that's why we have the code of ethics. One of the things. I think, for example, when you brought up the point about what do you do if somebody has a reoccurrence? I mean, that should be in the policies and procedures, right? And it should be clear what needs to be done. It should be clear on the peers side whether or not they need to report that or not. It should be clear on supervisions, for supervisions, what can be done. Now, if there's going to be some room to be flexible, so to speak, that'll also be done in the policies and procedures.
Yes.
I just worry about, again, I'm not saying that this was said, it's just what came into my mind based on other things that I've seen, is that, we really need to be careful about basing. That's the whole idea behind the 16 hours of ethics.
Yes.
You can't have people just doing what they think is right, because we all come from different backgrounds, and
Right.
our backgrounds will dictate what we think is right.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And many things, may feel right initially, but upon reflection, you can really think through, issues that could come up. And again, that's why code of ethics. And I totally want to endorse, the having company policies around a lot of these issues. Maybe there's a company policy that, staff cannot accept gifts from people who use services, right? That's a policy. Staff cannot take clients in their own car. That might be a policy, or might not be a policy. It might be a policy that it's okay to, but to have it written down, having policies in place of what happens when somebody, when drinking a person's work. So let's talk about onboarding. How do we help people come on into our organizations and, get comfy, get comfortable and start. Now, for all of us probably have had this experience of being, brought in as a new hire. We may have had it several times and recognize that some organizations do it a lot better than others. But I do want to make the point that onboarding any new hire does require kind of the whole organization, the whole agency to have their eyes on this new hire, because most of us will interact with different departments within the course of our work. And so onboarding is an activity that, may have human resources in charge, but really requires a lot more participation from more staff. So onboarding is just a process of integrating and acculturating new hires or new employees into the organization, helping them, providing them with the tools, resources, and knowledge to become successful and productive. You need to help people become, work well within this organization. So you want to involve people from many departments. And it does take place, as much as a year can be onboarding. It can be a gradual process. It's not just one day orientation, right? When you're taught how to fill out your timesheet and how to request time off, and read the safety manual. It takes place over time and helping people really understand how we work as an organization is designed, based on a set of specific objectives. What do we need for people to know how to do? So you want to measure it, evaluate it, improve it for the next crop of new hires. So, and that it's tailored for people in specific roles, positions, maybe locations, certainly whether someone's working from home or working, face to face would make a difference. There is a good link here for kind of general information on onboarding, how to help people, how to design an onboarding program that is really, that really does the job of providing people with the tools, resources, knowledge. Is there anything in your company now that you wish you had known that people could have oriented you to, which would have made your life a lot easier had you known? You can go ahead and put it in the chat. It's good to invite recently hired people to participate in the onboarding because they can, really speak to what would have been helpful or what was the most helpful thing in, in their onboarding process. Really, the benefits of onboarding are many. It does improve employee performance. Rather than wasting the first weeks and months of a job, person can get, actively engaged in their role, soon after they start. It does increase employee engagement, increases retention. People get off on the right foot with the organization, to start right, you often finish right. And it does decrease that time between when the person comes on and when they become fully productive. So good onboarding really helps, people kind of hit the ground sort of running. And Ernesto comments that, you know, at his agency, it was really the blind leading the blind, that the learning curve led to better staff management, peer training. Absolutely. And I think it is a process that we want to revisit and continuously improve. Again, it doesn't all have to take place in the first day or two, or even in the first week. There could be times where people get, some training moving forward. You want to, I used the word gamifying onboarding. I found this little blog that was fun that, talked about, ways of making onboarding fun. So I thought I'd link you to that. But, using creative strategies to teach new hires about company policies and practices, rather than kind of putting the manual on their lap and say, okay, read this. And then if you have any questions, come see me. Not a real productive way to get people to really understand policies and practice. You could have, a quest or a scavenger hunt where new hires could have, get their questions answered in the course of a day. So you could have, a list of questions and a list of people, and helping people kind of go to the right person. Anyway, making it a quest, making it a game, having it fun rather than sitting and reading the manual. Have a process for introducing new hires at the first staff meeting, a process or a ritual that kind of brings people into the company. You want to praise small accomplishments very early in the relationship. I think once we're on a job for a while, we forget how very difficult and challenging it can be to start a new role. And particularly if people, haven't been working in the field before. Okay. And then, celebrate new hires, lunch on the first day, cake, a song, something kind of really powerful that says, we're happy you're here. We've been waiting for you. We were hoping we'd get you, helping people feel, welcome and seen. And it may be overwhelming for people on their first day, but trust me, it is a very important way to welcome and engage new workers. Oops. So we're going to continue a little bit with onboarding, but we're shifting a little bit also to integrating peer support workers. So, integrating peer support workers takes the whole agency. It's not going to be accomplished by, the peer workers themselves and even just their supervisor, but rather, much more comprehensive welcome for peer support workers. I have written on the first bullet, culture, commitment, capacity, and this reflects an assessment that we will send to you. It's a self-organizational assessment where you look at your assessment and see how ready is my organization to integrate peer workers successfully. Do we have the culture, meaning is our organization recovery oriented? Do we believe in the, potential of people to, grow and recover and give back? What is the culture? Are we, again, recovery oriented, looking at our employees as, needing to learn maybe new skills and access new resources, rather than having a very punitive culture where people are dinged, for not meeting the mark. So we want to have a culture of support, ones that strengths-based, all of those recovery-oriented values that we talk about, having those really operationalized in our organization. And there are probably like 10 or 12 items around culture that you can look at and really ponder is how close is our culture? Commitment means really people's kind of interest in and willingness to follow through to get a robust peer support program started at the organization. What is our commitment to it? Is this something we see as really important? organizations that do a good job have a strong commitment because they recognize that while we're doing the best we can, we could do a much better job if we had peer support workers to engage, to outreach, to connect to people who might better use our services. So is that commitment a real passion for peer support? And then finally, the capacity. Do we have the knowledge, resources, money, staff to launch a peer support program within our organization? Where are we with that? So this self-assessment will really help you see, where's my starting place? What are our strengths as an organization? And what are our limitations? You know, where do we really need to strengthen? We want to have a trauma-informed, recovery-oriented workplace, not just for our peer workers, but for all of our workers, right? All of our workers benefit from having a more trauma-informed, recovery-oriented workplace. We need very strong supervision and training programs. This is probably one of the most important pieces of successful peer support, of having great supervision, having needed training on board. Some opportunities to interact with the team, opportunities for career advancement, and then aligning policies and procedures to remove any barriers to hiring and promoting peer support workers. Typically, you know, one common one is when people want to get peer support workers who have that personal experience of incarceration, and yet the organization has a, you know, pretty hard and fast policy of eliminating or preventing people with criminal justice backgrounds to participate. So recovery-oriented, trauma-informed, you know, this is a workplace where there are collaborative relationships between workers and management that's strength-based, empowering, respectful, growth-oriented, and mutually directed, that workers have a voice, that we are, you know, we have a voice in how our services will be delivered. And again, this universal design, that we don't just want to be recovery oriented for our peer workers, but all workers benefit from, you know, having a strengths-based, empowering, respectful approach. And we understand trauma-informed workplaces are ones that really provide safety and foster the growth of people who have experienced trauma, which is most of us, you know, recognition that trauma is really ubiquitous. And that workplaces have a lot of potential triggers, right? There are some potential triggers in workplaces and situations at work. You know, one of the most common ones that many people with history of trauma have difficulties with people in authority. Well, that's a disaster at work. I'm speaking from my own lived experience. That can be a disaster at work because even if you're in an organization that isn't strictly hierarchical, there are people in authority. And if that is a triggering for you, if that triggers sort of, I don't know, for example, an argumentative 14-year-old to appear, that can create a lot of problems at work. So you want to, you know, make sure that our organization is more trauma informed. You know, we want to attend to people's sense of safety, offering choices, working together collaboratively, not having some power over me. That there's trustworthiness, and that has a lot to do with, you know, being transparent. That if there's a corrective action, you know, that it is transparent and people understand why and what will happen and, you know, how it will be resolved. You know, no more double secret, double secret probation or something. And empowerment. So you can see there's a lot of overlap between a recovery-oriented workplace and a trauma-informed workplace. And in fact, you know, a lot of overlap, but I wanted to just lay it out there so that making it explicit, because these are kind of approaches that can be easily operationalized within our supervisory relationship and in terms of the management structure. And for a behavioral health organization that is trying to deliver recovery-oriented, trauma-informed services, it's very important that our workers, our employees, are treated in the same way. So training and supervision, or supervision and training, we know, and research is not just for peer support, but across the board, that good supervision is highly correlated to job performance, satisfaction, and retention. All things we want from our employees: great performance from them, having them be happy and satisfied with the work, and that they will stay. So we know that a good supervisory program can produce those outcomes. But I can't tell you the number of programs that I encounter where supervision, is catch as catch can. We thrive in chaos, and there's chaos, and maybe we'll meet this week, but maybe not. And that can be a disaster for all workers. And you see in many of those programs that staff turnover is pretty high. So supervision, likewise, is trauma informed and recovery oriented. We want that relationship is very primary. The organization does invest in its employees through supervision and educational opportunities. We really want to grow our people. Some organizations have, decided they're not going to invest because turnover is so high, and yet turnover is so high because the workers are not invested in. And so it becomes this a vicious circle of, failure, really. And then, to help people feel welcome, to educate all staff about the practice and benefits of peer support. That is in the kind of that organizational readiness assessment. Not everybody is on board with the benefits and the practice of peer support. Educating people is a first step. Maybe having conversations with people who are most reticent to, embrace peer support would be important too. So here's, this is an example, and I didn't want to overwhelm you with this, but this is an example of a great training and supervision program. And it does seem a very heavy lift, but I do want to give you the caveat that it is a Veterans Administration program, so they have a lot more resources than most of us do. The VA has been doing peer support for a lot longer than most of us have. And in fact, the ARERA Center, I started traveling to in the 90s and early aughts to help them with their peer support program. And all peer support specialists are expected, to participate in training and in supervision each and every week. So there's an ongoing training program where all staff at the ARERA Community Care Center, from psychiatrists, social workers, psychosocial counselors, peer support, come together for an educational opportunity. They're either led by staff or peers, but they range from ethics to, personality disorders. Peers also have an opportunity to teach some of their skill sets to the other providers, things about like money management or wellness strategies. So this training, this weekly training seminar, is something everyone attends, and everyone participates in, and it gives an opportunity for them to be together as a team and to learn from each other. Supervision, program coordinators are supervised. They are meeting once a week. So this once a week, it can be 30 minutes. It can be a 15 minutes, standing meeting with the whole team, but program coordinators will meet at least once a week. CPSs, which are certified peer specialists, attend all attend 2 weekly supervision meetings. All right, and again, it doesn't need to be a full hour. They can be quick and dirty kind of standing meetings where we just kind of do a quick regroup as a team, but having at least one where you sit down and talk. CPSs meet with leadership twice a month. So every other week they have an opportunity to check in with leadership. Some teams get group supervision and role supervision. And then the supervisors of peers meet themselves once a month to discuss like issues of competencies and expectations, which may be fed into the training program. So this is pretty robust, but I wanted to show you kind of a complete example of a supervision and training program to give you an idea of kind of sort of a best practice with this. So having opportunities for the whole team to meet together, having more frequent supervision, having peers attend staff meetings. So those are important. When we think about, I didn't do a lot on supervision today. Let me go back to this. Let me go back to this one, supervision. In general, supervisors provide, administrative support, teaching people how to navigate the organization, how to put in your timesheet, how to request time off, how to, fill in a reimbursement form, making sure, administrative would also be, talking about caseloads or how many people you're connected with. And that can be an important function of supervisors. They also do formative supervision, which is helping people, develop their professional chops, their, peer practice, helping them really develop that. So that's formative. And then there's supportive, which helps people with their morale, with their enthusiasm, with their helping them get what they need to do the job. So the different kind of formats of supervision or different functions of supervisor, we can think about administrative, formative, or supportive. This can be delivered in multiple ways. Some organizations will have one person do more of the administrative stuff, and that might be just, once a week for 10 minutes, just administrative, quick and dirty stuff. Whereas the supervision might be a group supervision that focuses on, formation and support. So there's not one way to roll a 7. There are a lot of ways to do it. You can, but you land at the same place, making sure people are getting what they need in terms of, the administrative, formative, and supportive supervision. Understanding our own strengths as a supervisor. I'm pretty good at the supportive and formative one. I'm the last to know anything administrative, so it's not my strength. And making sure that the people I supervise, get their administrative questions answered as well. So it can be done in, one-to-one format or group format or combination of both, can be very helpful. The group really allows people to learn from each other, but it sometimes can prevent people from talking about more personal and intimate things. So having a mix of group and one-to-one might be the most ideal. That there are opportunities to interact with the team. Are we at the time? So you want to schedule time for the team to be together regularly, like a standing huddle or weekly meetings, connect virtually if people are seldom in the office, social activities for the team, rotate, role of team facilitator. If you're having team meetings, having different people rotate. Career opportunities, we know that peer support workers can do other things, you know, promotion within the role. So you're a peer support worker too, you've been here and you really, you know, distinguished yourself. Promotion to supervisor manager, continuing ed to improve peer practice, continuing ed to increase knowledge in some area of interest. Some peer support workers leave the field, you know, are no longer working within behavioral health because, as you know, the career advancement wasn't there enough for them to own a home or support a family. And others leave peer support and get training in a different position within the field, a different profession. So maybe a social worker or a psychologist. But, you know, just in summary, and I know we're running out of time, you know, peer support workers perform an essential role in recovery of people with Sc.D. And within the organization requires really commitment on all levels of the organization. For a robust peer support program to call, the whole organization needs to be behind it. And that recruiting, hiring, onboarding peer support workers requires a team of dedicated colleagues. Again, not a single person, but a team to ensure that we're getting the best candidates, that we're hiring the best candidates, and that we're helping those peer support workers succeed in the role in which they were hired. So I want to thank you all for paying attention today. These are those great resources I told you about, right? So we want to make sure, you know, this toolkit from the city of Philadelphia is wonderful, really easy to navigate, very wonderful. I want everyone to get this. This one is also from the San Francisco Mental Health Association, this final one, the lower one. The competencies for peer support workers, you can look at those if you want. We worked on those a couple of years ago, but these are great resources to use. So any other questions you have, we don't have time for, but my hope is you'll be able to access the answers in these toolkits.
Thank you for providing so much information around all these really important topics, as well as resources. As I mentioned to everyone at the beginning and in the chat, all the related resources, the recordings, the trainings, etc., will all be sent out to everyone next Thursday. So the only requirements to get the continuing education credits was that you stayed on for the duration of the presentation. So thank you all so much for your time today, and also for all the incredible work that you're doing, your interest in this field, your support of this field, etc. And I look forward to hearing from you. If there are other questions that pop up or feedback, please feel free to reach out to any of us. All of our contact information is in the chat. And hopefully you also got a chance to maybe find some networking opportunities within the chat too. So here's the Scan Me. So if you just hold your cell phones right up there, it'll pop right up. You could also go right into the chat and copy and paste the survey into your web browser. And please complete the entire survey. It's really short, it takes under 2 minutes, but it's so critical for not only the funding that we receive for these fantastic presentations, but also to make sure that we're addressing your needs, you know, that you have, and that we make sure that our future presentations are reflective of those as well, and reflective of your feedback today.
Great.
So I'm going to give just another minute for folks to copy and paste that web browser. But otherwise, thank you all. I hope you have a smooth and easy rest of your week and a restful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Take care.
Bye.